He possessed a net worth of $12 billion, a fleet of private jets, and the power to topple governments with a single phone call. But tonight, Elias Sterling wasn't looking at a stock ticker or a boardroom. He was staring at a trembling waitress in a rundown diner who had just spilled coffee on his son's $3,000 Italian loafers. His son, arrogant and cruel, demanded her life be ruined. He expected his powerful father to destroy her. Instead, Elias Sterling stood up, looked at the waitress's terrified eyes, and saw a ghost from his past that stopped his heart. What he did next didn't just shock the diner. It changed history. The sprawling metropolis of Chicago was a grid of light and shadow, but inside the back seat of the armored Rolls-Royce Phantom, the world was silent and smelling of aged mahogany and leather. Elias Sterling, the 60-year-old CEO of Sterling Global, sat like a statue carved from granite. He was a man who had built an empire from dust. He wore a bespoke suit that cost more than most people earned in a year. But his hands were rough, the calluses on his palms a permanent reminder of the years he spent laying brick before he laid the foundations of his company. He checked his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe. It was 7:12 p.m. Beside him, scrolling mindlessly on a gold-plated smartphone, was Julian. Julian Sterling was 24 years old and had never worked a hard day in his life. He was handsome in the way that expensive grooming can make anyone handsome, but his eyes lacked depth. They were the eyes of a boy who believed the world was a vending machine waiting for him to press a button. "Dad, seriously," Julian groaned, dropping the phone into his lap. "Why are we going to the South Side? If you wanted a steak, we could have just called Chef Marco to the penthouse. Or we could have gone to Le Ciel. They keep your table open." Elias didn't look at his son. He stared out the tinted window as the pristine streets of the financial district gave way to cracked pavement and flickering streetlights. "It's my birthday, Julian," Elias said, his voice a low rumble that usually silenced boardrooms. "And on my birthday, I eat where I want." "But the South Side?" Julian scoffed, inspecting his fingernails. "It smells like exhaust and desperation out there. Look at these people." He gestured vaguely at the pedestrians on the sidewalk, tired workers waiting for buses, mothers carrying groceries. "It's depressing." "It's reality," Elias snapped, finally turning his gaze to his son. The look was sharp enough to cut glass. "Something you have been insulated from for too long. You missed the board meeting this morning." Julian rolled his eyes, a gesture of disrespect that made Elias's jaw tighten. "It was boring, Dad. Just numbers. Profits up 3%, overhead down 2%. I don't need to be there to know we're rich. I hired a proxy. That's what being an executive is, isn't it? Delegation." "Delegation is for tasks," Elias said coldly. "Leadership is for people. You don't know the first thing about the people who work for you or the people who buy our products." "I know they want what I have," Julian smirked. "That's enough." The car slowed down. The chauffeur, a massive man named Graves who had been with Elias for 20 years, lowered the partition. "We're here, sir. The iron skillet." Julian looked out the window and gasped in genuine horror. "You have got to be kidding me. Is that a neon sign missing a letter? It says, The Iron Skiller." "Dad, we are going to get food poisoning just by breathing the air." The restaurant was a relic of the 1980s. It was a brick building that had seen better days, wedged between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The windows were foggy with condensation, and the light spilling out was a warm, greasy yellow. "I used to eat here," Elias said, opening his own door before Graves could get to it. 40 years ago, before you were born, before the billions, when I had $6 to my name and a hole in my boot." touching," Julian muttered, stepping out gingerly, checking the pavement for puddles that might ruin his Gucci loafers. "Can we make this quick? I have a table at the vault at 10. Topher and the guys are waiting." Elias adjusted his cufflinks. "We leave when I'm finished. And Julian, fix your tie. You look like a slob." They walked toward the entrance. The bell above the door jingled, a cheap, tinny sound that transported Elias back 4 decades. He took a deep breath. It smelled of frying bacon, old coffee, and lemon floor wax. It smelled like the struggle. Julian wrinkled his nose, pulling a silk handkerchief from his pocket to cover his mouth. God, the ventilation in here is illegal. "Sit," Elias commanded, pointing to a booth in the back corner. The red vinyl was patched with duct tape. As they sat, the diner went quiet. It wasn't empty, but the clientele, construction workers, nurses in scrubs, truck drivers, knew money when they saw it, and the Sterlings radiated money. The silence was heavy, filled with judgment and curiosity. "Great," Julian whispered loudly. "Now we're the exhibit at the zoo. Can I just buy the place and fire everyone so we can eat in peace?" "One more word," Elias warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "and I will cut off your access to the Cayman accounts tonight." Julian's mouth snapped shut, but his eyes burned with petulant rage. He slumped against the sticky vinyl, crossing his arms. This dinner was a test. Elias had been planning it for months. He was dying, though Julian didn't know that yet. The doctors gave him 6 months, maybe a year. He had to decide if the empire he sacrificed his soul to build would go to his son, or if he would have to burn it all down to save it. Tonight was the final exam, and Julian was failing. The diner was understaffed. Elias could tell immediately. There were 20 tables and only 2 waitresses working the floor. One was an older woman, moving with the slow, pained gait of someone with bad knees. The other was younger, moving in a blur of motion, balancing plates up her arm and pouring coffee with practiced efficiency. She was the one who approached their table. "Welcome to the Iron Skillet," she said, pulling a notepad from her apron. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide, and her uniform was clean but frayed at the collar. Her name tag read Sarah. "Good evening, Sarah," Elias said politely. She paused, surprised by the courtesy. Most people in suits who wandered in here by mistake usually barked orders. She offered a tired, genuine smile. "What can I get started for you, gentlemen? Coffee. We just brewed a fresh pot." "I'll take a black coffee," Elias said, "and the meatloaf special, with the mashed potatoes." Sarah scribbled it down. "Good choice. The gravy is extra good tonight." "And for you, sir?" She turned to Julian. Julian didn't look up from the menu, which he was holding with the tips of his fingers as if it were contaminated with the plague. "Do you have bottled water? Sparkling? Pellegrino?" Sarah hesitated. "We have club soda from the gun, or I think we have a bottle of Dasani in the back." Julian let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Dasani, wonderful. Just tap water then. I assume you boil it first, and bring me the steak. Rare. If it's medium rare, I'm sending it back, and don't drown it in whatever grease you people use." Sarah's smile faltered, but she kept her professionalism. "The T-bone, rare. Got it. Anything else?" "Clean silverware," Julian said, dropping the menu on the table. "This fork has a spot on it." "Julian," Elias said, his voice a warning growl. "It does, Dad. Look at it." "I'm so sorry," Sarah said quickly, reaching for the fork. "I'll get you a fresh set right away." As she reached for the cutlery, Julian shifted abruptly, throwing his arm out to check his phone. His elbow collided hard with Sarah's arm. It was an accident, technically, but it was born of carelessness. Sarah lost her grip on the heavy ceramic water pitcher she was holding against her hip. It tipped. Ice-cold water, mixed with crushed ice, cascaded down. It missed Elias completely, but it landed squarely in Julian's lap, soaking his bespoke Italian trousers and splashing onto his leather loafers. The diner went silent. For a second, there was only the sound of water dripping onto the linoleum floor. Then, Julian exploded. "You stupid cow!" he screamed, jumping up. The chair screeched against the floor. "Look at what you did. Do you have any idea what these cost? Do you?" Sarah went pale. She grabbed a rag from her apron, her hands shaking. "Sir, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to. You moved your arm and—" "Don't you dare blame me!" Julian roared. He snatched the rag from her hand and threw it on the floor. "You are incompetent. You're clumsy and stupid. This suit is silk. It's ruined." "Julian, sit down," Elias said calmly. He hadn't moved. He was watching Sarah. Not her fear, but her face. Something about the angle of her chin, the way her eyes widened in panic. It triggered a memory buried deep in the vaults of his mind. "I will not sit down," Julian yelled, turning to the rest of the diner. "Where is the manager? I want the manager now." The older waitress hurried to the back, and a moment later, a balding man in a sweat-stained shirt came running out. This was Rick, the owner. He looked terrified seeing the scene. "What's the problem? What happened?" Rick stammered, looking between the furious young man in the expensive suit and his trembling waitress. "This girl." Julian spat the word like poison, pointing a finger in Sarah's face. "Dumped a pitcher of water on me. She ruined a $5,000 suit. I want her fired. Now. And I want compensation." "It was an accident, Rick," Sarah pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "He hit my arm." "Liar." Julian slammed his hand on the table. Elias watched closely. He saw Sarah flinch, but she didn't back down. She stood her ground, despite the tears. She bit her lip, a specific, nervous habit. She bit the left side of her lower lip. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. No, he thought. It can't be. He looked at her neck. In the commotion, her collar had shifted. There, resting against her collarbone, was a silver chain. It was cheap, tarnished silver. But the pendant? The pendant was a locket. Not a heart, but a small, silver compass. The world seemed to stop for Elias Sterling. The shouting of his son, the stammering of the manager, the clatter of the kitchen, it all faded into a dull roar. He knew that compass. He had bought it in a pawn shop in 1985. He had engraved the back of it himself with a rusty nail because he couldn't afford the engraving fee. To Clara. My true north. Clara. The woman he loved before the money. The woman who vanished 30 years ago when he was just starting to climb the ladder of success. The woman he had looked for a decade, until he assumed she was dead or wanted nothing to do with him. Why was this waitress wearing Clara's locket? I can't afford to lose this job, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. Please, Rick, my daughter. She needs her medicine. I don't care about your brat, Julian sneered, wiping his pants with a napkin. You should have thought about that before you decided to be an idiot. Fire her, or I will sue this rat hole into bankruptcy. My father is Elias Sterling. Do you know who that is? Rick the manager went pale. He looked at Elias, who was still sitting like a stone statue. Mr. Sterling? Rick squeaked. Elias didn't answer the manager. He stood up slowly. He was a tall man, imposing, with broad shoulders that filled out his suit. He stepped out of the booth and walked toward Sarah. Julian smirked, crossing his arms. Finally. Dad, tell him. Tell him to toss her out on the street." Elias ignored his son. He stopped 12 inches from Sarah. She looked up at him, terrified, bracing for the verbal assault she was sure was coming. "That necklace," Elias said, his voice trembling slightly, uncharacteristically soft. "Where did you get it?" Sarah's hand flew to her throat, covering the silver compass. She took a step back, defensive now. It was my mother's. It's all I have left of her." "Your mother," Elias breathed. "What was her name?" "Clara," Sarah said softly. "Clara Miller." The air left the room. Julian groaned loudly. "Oh my God, Dad, are you hitting on the help? Seriously, can we focus on the lawsuit?" Elias turned to his son. The look on his face was no longer cold. It was an inferno. It was a rage so pure and so terrifying that Julian actually took a step back, tripping over his own feet. "Silence," Elias said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command of absolute authority. Elias turned back to Sarah. "Clara Miller. She passed away 5 years ago," Sarah said, tears finally spilling over. "Cancer. She died broke. She worked herself to death to raise me." Elias felt the weight of 30 years of regret crash down on him. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her. He saw Clara's eyes. He saw his own chin. He saw the daughter he never knew existed, the daughter who was currently waiting tables to pay for medicine while his other child, the son he had raised in luxury, stood there demanding her destruction. He looked at Julian. Then he looked at Sarah. The test was over. The results were in. "Rick," Elias said, not taking his eyes off Sarah. Yes, Mr. Sterling. Bring me the deed to this building." "The what?" "The deed. The ownership papers. Does your landlord live nearby?" He lives upstairs. Why?" "Go get him," Elias said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a checkbook. "I'm buying this building. Right now. And I'm buying your restaurant." Julian laughed nervously. "Dad, what the hell? You're buying a diner to spite me. That's petty, even for you." "I'm not buying it to spite you, Julian," Elias said, uncapping a gold fountain pen. "I'm buying it to fire you." The diner's kitchen door swung open, and a man who looked like he had been roused from a deep sleep stumbled out. This was Mr. Henderson, the landlord. He was wearing a stained tracksuit and slippers, looking bewildered as Rick the manager practically dragged him to the table where the richest man in Chicago stood waiting. "What's going on?" Henderson grumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Rick, who are these people? Why are you interrupting Wheel of Fortune?" "Mr. Henderson," Elias said, his voice smooth as silk but hard as iron. "My name is Elias Sterling. I want to buy this building. What is your price?" Henderson squinted at Elias, then at the terrified Rick, and finally at the fuming Julian. He let out a dry laugh. "Sterling? The tech guy? Look, buddy, this place ain't for sale. I got tenants upstairs. I got the laundromat next door." "Everything is for sale," Elias interrupted. He pulled the checkbook from his inner pocket. "I don't have time for negotiation. The market value of this block, given the crime rate and the state of disrepair, is roughly $400,000. I will write you a check right now for $2 million, but I need the keys and the title deed in my hand in 5 minutes. The silence in the diner was absolute. Even the fry cook had poked his head out to listen. $2 million. It was a lottery win for a man like Henderson. $2 million, Henderson stammered. His eyes bulged. "You serious? This check will clear? I could buy this entire zip code without checking my bank balance," Elias said dryly. "Do we have a deal?" "Hell yes, we have a deal," Henderson shouted. "I've got the papers in the safe upstairs. I'll be right back." He scrambled away faster than he had moved in years. Julian stood up, his face a mask of disbelief and humiliation. "Dad, have you lost your mind? You just overpaid by 500% for a Roach motel. And for what? To impress a waitress?" Elias capped his pen and turned slowly to his son. The transaction was done verbally. The money was a formality. He was now the owner. "I didn't do it to impress her, Julian. I did it to protect her. From people like you." "Protect her?" Julian scoffed, gesturing wildly. "She's a nobody. She's serving coffee for pennies. And you're treating me, your own son, like I'm the criminal here." "You are a criminal," Elias said softly. "You steal dignity. You steal joy. And you do it because you think your last name gives you immunity. It ends tonight." Elias held out his hand. "Give me the black card, and the keys to the Rolls-Royce." Julian froze. A nervous titter ran through the onlookers in the diner. "What?" Julian whispered. "The Amex Centurion card, the keys to the Phantom. Give them to me." "You can't be serious. How am I supposed to get to the vault? The guys are waiting." "You aren't going to the vault," Elias said. "And you aren't going back to the penthouse. I'm freezing your assets, Julian. All of them. The trust fund, the investment accounts, the emergency cash reserves. As of this moment, you have $0 to your name." Julian's face turned a blotchy red. "You can't do that. I'm your heir. I'm a sterling." "Being a sterling used to mean something," Elias said, his voice heavy with a sadness that Julian was too shallow to understand. "It used to mean hard work. It used to mean integrity. You have turned it into a punchline." Elias snapped his fingers. Graves, the massive chauffeur who had been standing silently by the door, stepped forward. "Graves," Elias said. "Take Mr. Julian's phone." "Dad!" Julian screamed, as Graves easily plucked the gold-plated smartphone from his hand. "That has all my contacts, my crypto wallet." "It belongs to the company," Elias said, "and you no longer work for the company." "Give me the keys, Julian," Elias repeated. Trembling with rage, Julian slammed the heavy car keys onto the table. "Fine, take them. See if I care. I'll call Mom. She won't let you do this." "Your mother has been living in Paris for 10 years, Elias reminded him. "And she hates your entitlement as much as I do. Call her. But you'll have to use the payphone outside, if you have a quarter." "You're stranding me here?" Julian looked around the diner, at the rough-looking patrons he had insulted just minutes ago. Fear finally crept into his eyes. "In the South Side? At night? Dad, I could get mugged. I could get killed." Elias looked at Sarah, who was watching the scene with wide, shocked eyes. "She takes the bus here every day," Elias said, gesturing to Sarah. "She survives. I'm sure you'll figure it out. You have a college degree, don't you? Use your superior intellect." "Get out!" Elias barked. Julian looked at his father, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the reprieve. It didn't come. He looked at Graves, who stood like a wall. He looked at the patrons, who were grinning with schadenfreude. With a noise of pure frustration, Julian stormed toward the door. "I hate you! I hope you die alone!" The bell jingled as he slammed the door behind him. Through the window, they watched him stand on the curb, looking left and right, realizing for the first time in his life that he was completely and utterly alone. Elias didn't watch him for long. He turned back to the table. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving him feeling old and tired. But he had one more thing to do. The most important thing. He turned to Sarah. The diner was quiet again, but the atmosphere had changed. It was no longer tense with aggression, it was heavy with confusion. Rick, the manager, was standing awkwardly by the counter, unsure if he still had a job. Elias signaled to Graves. "Clear the room. Give everyone $1,000 for their trouble and ask them to leave. I need to speak to this young woman alone." Graves nodded and began moving through the diner, pulling a thick stack of bills from his jacket. The patrons, realizing they were witnessing something far beyond their pay grade and getting paid for it, happily finished their coffees and shuffled out. Rick and the other waitress retreated to the kitchen. Within 2 minutes, it was just Elias and Sarah. Sarah was clutching the tray against her chest like a shield. She looked at Elias, not with gratitude, but with suspicion. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why did you do that? Why did you buy the building? I don't understand." Elias slowly sat back down in the booth. He gestured to the seat across from him, the seat Julian had vacated. "Please, Sarah, sit down. I won't bite. I promise." Sarah hesitated, then slowly lowered herself into the booth. She kept a distance, her eyes darting to the door where the bodyguard stood watch. "I didn't do it for charity," Elias began, his voice raspy. "I did it because of the necklace." Sarah's hand went to her throat again. "My mother's locket. You said you knew her. You said you knew Clara." "I didn't just know her," Elias said. He reached into his own pocket. He pulled out a wallet, worn leather, and extracted a small folded photograph. It was black and white, creased down the middle. He slid it across the table. Sarah looked down. It was a photo of a young couple sitting on the hood of a 1970s Chevy. The man was handsome, smiling, covered in construction dust. The woman was beautiful, laughing, her hair wind-blown. Around her neck was the silver compass. That's Mom," Sarah whispered. She touched the photo. "She looks so happy. I've never seen this picture." "And the man?" Elias asked gently. Sarah looked up at Elias, then back at the photo. The eyes were the same. The jawline, though softened by age in the living man, was unmistakable in the photograph. "That's you," she realized. You were together?" "We were in love," Elias said, a tear finally tracing a path down his weathered cheek. 30 years ago. We were both poor. I was a bricklayer. She was a seamstress. We had nothing but big dreams. I promised her I would build her a castle. I promised her the world." "What happened?" Sarah asked, her guard dropping slightly. "Why did you leave?" "I didn't leave." Elias shook his head. "I went to New York. A job opportunity. High risk, high reward. I told her I'd be back in 3 months with enough money to start our life. But things went wrong. I lost the address. I got into trouble. It took me 6 months to get back to Chicago. When I returned to her apartment, it was empty. The landlord said she moved out. No forwarding address." Elias leaned forward. "I looked for her, Sarah. For 10 years I hired private investigators. But she had changed her last name. She went off the grid. I eventually convinced myself she didn't want to be found. I thought she had moved on." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "She didn't move on. She ran away because she was pregnant. Her parents kicked her out. She thought you abandoned her. She thought you were just another guy who made promises and left." The words hit Elias like a physical blow. "Pregnant," he whispered. "With you?" Sarah nodded. "She never spoke bad of you, though. She just said. She said your internal compass pointed toward gold, and hers pointed toward home. That you were 2 ships sailing in different directions." "She was wrong," Elias choked out. "My compass was always her. I got lost in the storm." He looked at Sarah, really looked at her. "You are my daughter. I have a daughter." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked conflicted. "Mr. Sterling, Elias, look, this is a nice story, and maybe it's true, But you can't just walk in here 30 years late, buy the building, and expect to play happy family. You're a billionaire. I'm a waitress. We live in different universes." "I don't expect anything," Elias said earnestly. "I know I can't buy back the years I missed. I can't buy your forgiveness. But I can try to fix the future." He pointed to the name tag on her apron. "You mentioned earlier, your daughter needs medicine, my granddaughter." Sarah froze. The mention of her child stripped away her defenses. The reality of her life, the unpaid bills, the sick child, the fear, came rushing back. "Lily," Sarah whispered. "Her name is Lily. She's 6. What's wrong with her?" "Leukemia," Sarah said, the word hanging in the air like a curse. "Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. She's in remission, but the treatments are expensive, and the insurance won't cover the new specialist in Boston. I'm working double shifts here just to pay for her meds, but we're falling behind. If I miss a payment—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Elias felt a rage burn inside him. But this time it wasn't directed at Julian. It was directed at the universe, at the cruelty of fate that allowed his son to buy $3,000 shoes while his granddaughter fought for her life without proper care. "She will never miss a treatment again," Elias vowed. "Is she in the hospital now?" "No, she's at home with a neighbor. I can't afford the hospital overnight fees unless it's an emergency." Elias stood up. "Get your coat." "What?" "Get your coat, Sarah. We are going to get Lily." "And go where?" "To the best hospital in the world," Elias said. "And then we are going home. Not to your apartment. To our home." "I can't just leave," Sarah protested, though she was already untying her apron. "I have a shift, Rick. I own the building," Elias reminded her with a small, sad smile. "I think the owner can grant you indefinite paid leave." Sarah stood there for a moment, looking at this stranger who was her father. She saw the regret in his eyes, but also the power. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the crushing weight of the world on her shoulders. She felt safe. She took off her apron and laid it on the table, right next to where Julian's expensive car keys sat ignored. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's go get Lily." As they walked toward the door, Graves opened it for them. The rain was pouring down outside, washing the grime off the city streets. But just as they stepped onto the sidewalk, a shadow lunged from the alleyway. It was Julian. He was soaking wet, his expensive suit ruined, his hair plastered to his skull. He held a jagged piece of metal, a pipe he had scavenged from the trash. His eyes were wild, dilated with panic and rage. "You aren't leaving me!" Julian screamed, blocking their path to the Rolls-Royce. "You think you can just replace me with her?" The rain hammered against the asphalt, drowning out the distant hum of the city. But it couldn't drown out the ragged breathing of Julian Sterling. He looked like a feral animal. The $3,000 suit was mud-stained, his hair was a wet mop, and his eyes were wide with a terrifying mix of entitlement and insanity. "Julian, put it down," Elias said calmly, though his heart was racing. He stepped in front of Sarah, shielding her body with his own. "This is over. Don't make it worse." "Make it worse?" Julian shrieked, his voice cracking. "You took everything. You took my money. You took my life. All for her? A waitress who smells like grease?" "I took nothing that was yours," Elias countered, his voice rising over the sound of the rain. "I took back what was mine. You never earned a cent of it. Now step aside." "No!" Julian screamed. He raised the iron pipe high. "If I can't have the legacy, no one can." He swung. It happened in slow motion. Sarah screamed. Graves, the bodyguard, was fast, faster than a man of his size should be, but the distance was just too great. The pipe wasn't aimed at Elias. It was aimed at Sarah. Elias didn't think. He didn't calculate the risk. For the first time in 30 years, he didn't check the odds. He just moved. He threw his left arm up and lunged forward, catching the blow meant for his daughter. Crack! The sound of metal hitting bone was sickeningly loud. Elias grunted, a guttural sound of pain as the pipe shattered his ulna. He stumbled back, falling against the wet pavement. "Dad!" Julian gasped, dropping the pipe as if it were red hot. The reality of what he had done pierced through his rage. He had just assaulted Elias Sterling. Before Julian could move, a shadow engulfed him. Graves was there. The massive chauffeur didn't say a word. He simply grabbed Julian by the throat and slammed him against the brick wall of the diner. The force of the impact knocked the wind out of Julian. Graves twisted Julian's arm behind his back, forcing him, face first, into the puddles on the sidewalk. "Stay down," Graves growled, his knee pressing into Julian's spine. "Dad, tell him to get off me!" Julian sobbed into the dirty water. "It was an accident. You stepped in the way." Sarah was on her knees beside Elias, her hands hovering over his arm. Oh my God, you're bleeding, you're hurt." Elias grit his teeth, his face pale, sweat mixing with the rain on his forehead. "I'm fine," he wheezed. "It's just an arm. I've had worse on construction sites." You saved me," Sarah whispered, looking at him with wide, shocked eyes. "Why?" "That's what fathers do," Elias managed a weak smile. "They protect their children." Sirens wailed in the distance. Graves had triggered the silent alarm on his watch the moment Julian appeared. Blue and red lights bounced off the wet streets as 2 squad cars screeched to a halt in front of the diner. Officers swarmed out, guns drawn. "Drop the weapon," one shouted at Graves. "He's security," Elias shouted from the ground, fighting the pain. "The assailant is on the ground. That man there." He pointed at Julian with his good arm. The officers hesitated, recognizing the famous face of Elias Sterling, even in the rain and mud. They holstered their weapons and rushed to cuff Julian. "Get your hands off me!" Julian screamed as they hauled him up. "Do you know who I am? I am Julian Sterling. I will have your badges." "Julian Sterling?" the officer asked, looking at Elias for confirmation. Elias struggled to his feet, aided by Sarah. He held his broken arm close to his chest. He looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger, a monster he had created with money and neglect. "No," Elias said coldly. "He is nobody. Press charges, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder." "Dad, no!" Julian's eyes bulged. "You can't send me to jail. I won't survive in there. Dad, please, I'm sorry." "Graves," Elias said, turning away from the pleading boy. "Give the officers the dashcam footage from the rolls. It recorded everything." "Yes, sir," Graves said, straightening his jacket. As they shoved Julian into the back of the squad car, he pressed his face against the glass, weeping, mouthing the word "Dad" over and over again. But Elias didn't look back. He turned to Sarah. "We have a schedule to keep. Your daughter is waiting." "You need a hospital," Sarah cried. "Your arm is broken." "We will go to the hospital," Elias nodded. "After we pick up Lily. I'm not breaking my promise." The interior of the Rolls-Royce was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thrum of rain against the bulletproof glass. Elias sat in the back, his face grey with pain, a makeshift sling fashioned from a silk scarf supporting his arm. Sarah sat next to him, watching him with a mixture of awe and concern. They had stopped at a run-down apartment complex 10 minutes away. Sarah had run inside and emerged 5 minutes later, carrying a sleeping child wrapped in a pink blanket. Lily. She was small for her age, pale, with thinning hair that hinted at the chemotherapy she had endured. She slept soundly in Sarah's lap, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. Elias stared at the child. He saw the slope of her nose. It was Clara's nose. He saw the shape of her ears. They were his ears. "She's beautiful," Elias whispered. "She's tired," Sarah said softly, stroking Lily's hair. "She's always tired these days." "Graves," Elias said to the front seat. "Call Dr. Orris at Northwestern Memorial. Tell him I'm coming in. Tell him to prep the presidential suite. And tell him I want the entire oncology team on standby." "Already done, sir," Graves replied. "Dr. Harris is waiting at the private entrance." Sarah looked around the luxurious car. This is too much. The presidential suite? The whole team? I can't pay for this." "You aren't paying," Elias said firmly. "Sarah, you need to understand something. I have $12 billion. Do you know how much money that is? I could buy the hospital. I could buy the pharmaceutical company that makes her medicine. Money is a tool, and for the last 20 years, I've been using it to build cold, dead things. Buildings, tech, stocks. Tonight, I'm using it for life." The car pulled into the ambulance bay of the hospital, but not the public one. They went to a secluded VIP entrance, where a team of doctors and nurses in pristine scrubs were already waiting with a gurney and a wheelchair. "Mr. Sterling!" Dr. Harris, a grey-haired man with kind eyes, rushed forward as Graves opened the door. "We heard about the assault. We need to get you into X-ray immediately." "Check the girl first," Elias commanded, ignoring the wheelchair offered to him. He gestured to Sarah and Lily. "This is my granddaughter. Lily. She has all. She's in remission, but showing signs of fatigue. I want a full workup. Genomic sequencing, bone marrow analysis, everything. I want the best treatment plan on the planet, and I want it started tonight." Dr. Harris blinked, surprised, but he knew better than to argue with Elias Sterling. "Of course. Nurse, take Lily and her mother to Suite A. Dr. Chen, you're with them." "No," Sarah said, holding Lily tight. "I'm not leaving you. You're hurt because of me." Elias managed a weak laugh. "I'm a tough old bird, Sarah. Go with Lily. Get her settled in the suite. I'll get my arm set and join you." Sarah hesitated, then leaned forward and kissed Elias on the cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "Dad." The word hung in the air, warm and bright. It was the first time she had called him that. Elias felt a lump in his throat that had nothing to do with the pain in his arm. He watched them disappear down the hallway, Lily safe in the arms of the best medical team money could buy. "All right, Elias," Dr. Harris said gently. "Your turn. Let's look at that arm." 3 hours later, Elias sat in a leather armchair in the presidential suite. His left arm was encased in a black fiberglass cast. He was pumped full of painkillers, which dulled the throbbing ache to a manageable hum. The suite looked more like a 5-star hotel room than a hospital. There were floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, plush carpets, and a kitchenette. In the center of the room, in a massive, fluffy bed, Lily was awake. She was eating a bowl of gourmet ice cream, her eyes wide as she watched a giant flat-screen TV playing cartoons. Sarah sat beside her, looking cleaner and more rested than she had in years. She had showered in the suite's bathroom and was wearing fresh clothes Graves had procured for her. Elias watched them. He felt a strange sensation in his chest. Peace. His phone buzzed on the side table. It was his lawyer, Marcus. Elias picked it up. "Marcus, is it done?" "It's done, Elias." Marcus's voice came through tinny and sharp. "I've filed the emergency motions. Julian has been removed from the board of directors effective immediately. The trust is dissolved under the moral turpitude clause. He's currently being processed at Cook County Jail. No bail has been set yet due to the flight risk and the severity of the assault. Good, Elias said. And the other matter? Marcus asked. The will? Yes, I've drafted the changes. Everything, the company, the assets, the properties, is being transferred to a new trust. Beneficiaries? Elias asked, watching Lily laugh at the cartoon. Sarah Miller and Lily Miller, with you as the trustee until the end. Bring the papers here for me to sign in the morning, Elias said. And Marcus, get the PR team ready. The press is going to have a field day with Billionaire arrested for assaulting father. I want the narrative controlled. Julian is a troubled young man who refused help. Sarah is the long-lost family I am joyfully reuniting with. Understood, sir. Rest well. Elias hung up. He stood up and walked over to the bed. Lily looked up at him. She pointed her spoon at his cast. Did you fight a dragon? Elias smiled, sitting on the edge of the bed. Something like that. A very angry, foolish dragon. Did you win? I think so, Elias said, looking at Sarah. I think I won the biggest prize of all. Sarah reached out and took his good hand. Dr. Orris says her blood counts are low, but stable. He thinks with the new immunotherapy protocol, she has a 95% chance of a full cure. He said we caught it just in time. If we had waited another month. She squeezed his hand. You saved her life, Elias. We saved each other, Elias said. But the story wasn't quite over. There was one loose end, one final twist that fate had in store for the Sterling family. The door to the suite opened. It wasn't a nurse. It wasn't Graves. It was a woman in a trench coat, dripping wet from the rain. She looked older than Elias remembered, her face lined with age and sorrow, but the eyes were unmistakably familiar. Sarah gasped. Mum? Elias froze. He turned slowly. Standing in the doorway was Clara. She wasn't dead. The silence in the hospital suite was heavier than the cast on Elias's arm. The rain lashed against the window, echoing the storm of emotions swirling in the room. Sarah stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth. Mum, but the funeral, the ashes. I don't understand. Clara Miller stepped into the room. She was older, her hair streaked with grey, and her clothes were simple and worn, but her posture was upright, proud. She looked at Sarah with eyes full of tears, then at Elias. It was a closed casket, Sarah, Clara said, her voice trembling, because there was no body. Explain, Elias demanded, his voice low and dangerous. He stood up, ignoring the pain in his arm. Sarah told me you died of cancer 5 years ago. I had cancer, Clara admitted, walking slowly toward her daughter. Stage 3, I was weak, I was vulnerable, and that's when she found me. Who? Elias asked, though a dark pit was forming in his stomach. He already knew. Veronica, Clara spat the name. Your wife. Julian's mother. Elias gripped the back of the chair. Veronica, his ex-wife. A woman who loved power more than she loved her own son. Clara continued, tears spilling down her cheeks. She came to me in the hospice. She told me that you knew about Sarah. She said you were ashamed. She said you wanted to run for Senate, and an illegitimate daughter with a poor waitress would ruin your image. Liar, Elias roared. I never knew. I looked for you for 10 years. I know that now, Clara sobbed. But back then, I was dying. I had no money. Veronica made me an offer. She would pay for Sarah's college debts. She would ensure Sarah had a start in life. But only if I disappeared. Permanently. She said if I ever contacted Sarah again, or if Sarah ever tried to find you, she would destroy Sarah's life. She threatened to frame Sarah for crimes she didn't commit. Sarah rushed forward and embraced her mother. She told me you died. She sent me a letter from the hospital saying you passed away in your sleep. I had to let you believe it, Clara whispered, burying her face in Sarah's hair. I recovered. The treatment worked. But I couldn't come back. I was terrified of what Veronica would do to you. So I watched from the shadows. I've been a ghost for 5 years, Sarah, watching you struggle, wanting to help, but too afraid that she would strike. Clara turned to Elias. But tonight, I saw the news. I saw Julian arrested. I saw you publicly claim Sarah as your family. I knew the dragon was finally slain. I knew she couldn't hurt us anymore because you were finally protecting them. Elias sank back into the chair. The weight of the revelation was crushing. His ex-wife had stolen 30 years of his life. She had stolen his family. Graves, Elias said, his voice terrifyingly calm. The large bodyguard stepped forward from the shadows. Sir, find Veronica. She's in Paris. Revoke her alimony. Seize her assets. And hand the evidence of blackmail over to the federal authorities. I want her to share a cell block with her son. With pleasure, sir. Elias looked at the 3 women in the room. Clara, the love of his life. Sarah, the daughter he missed. Lily, the future he almost lost. I have so much to make up for, Elias said, his voice breaking. And I have so little time. Sarah pulled away from Clara gently. What do you mean? Elias looked at Dr. Aris, who was standing quietly in the corner. The doctor nodded solemnly. I didn't just come to the hospital for my arm, Sarah, Elias said softly. I have pancreatic cancer. It's terminal. The room gasped. Lily looked up from her ice cream, sensing the shift in mood. 6 months, Elias said. Maybe a year if I'm lucky. That's why I took Julian to dinner. I needed to see if he was ready to lead. He wasn't. He reached out his good hand towards them. I spent my whole life building a fortune of $12 billion. I thought that was my legacy. I was wrong. The money is just paper. It's ash. He looked at Lily. You are my legacy. Don't talk like that, Sarah cried, rushing to his side. We have the best doctors. We have money now. We can fight it. We will fight, Elias promised. But I need you to be ready. Sarah, you are going to take over Sterling Global. Not the business, the foundation. I'm liquidating the company. We aren't going to build skyscrapers anymore. We are going to build hospitals. We are going to build schools. You and Clara, you're going to give it all away. Clara walked over and placed her hand on Elias's shoulder, the first time they had touched in 3 decades. It was electric, familiar, home. We'll do it together, Clara said, for as long as we have. The funeral of Elias Sterling was the largest Chicago had ever seen. Presidents attended. Kings sent flowers. But the front row wasn't filled with dignitaries. It was filled with the staff of the Iron Skillet Diner. Sarah stood at the podium, dressed in black, but her head was high. Beside her stood Clara, looking healthy and radiant, and Lily, whose hair had grown back in soft golden curls, cancer-free. My father, Sarah spoke into the microphone, her voice echoing across the cathedral, was a complicated man. He built an empire of steel, but he died with a heart of gold. He taught me that it's never too late to do the right thing. It's never too late to turn the car around. She looked down at the coffin. He saved us, she said. And in doing so, he saved himself. Far away, in a cold grey cell at Cook County Correctional, Julian Sterling watched the broadcast on a small, grainy television. He was scrubbing floors, wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. He watched Sarah, the waitress he had tried to destroy, announce the opening of the Elias and Clara Children's Hospital, a facility that would provide free care to every child in the state. Julian turned off the TV. He sat on his cot and put his head in his hands. He had wanted to be a king. Now, he was just a cautionary tale. Back at the cathedral, Sarah finished her speech. She walked down the steps and took her mother's hand. They walked out into the sunlight, where the air was crisp and clean. Elias was gone. But for the first time in history, the sterling name didn't mean greed. It meant hope. And that was a fortune that would last forever. What an incredible journey. Elias Sterling spent a lifetime chasing money, only to realize in his final moments that his true wealth was sitting in a rundown diner, wearing a waitress uniform. He lost his son to greed, but he found his daughter through love. It proves that no matter how far you go down the wrong path, you can always choose to turn around, but only if you are brave enough to face the truth. Now, I have a question for you. If you were Elias, would you have forgiven Julian? Or did he deserve to lose everything for how he treated Sarah? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that family is worth more than gold. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.